welcome to the world behind midnight. What happened in the hills above Clearwater Bend was not a combat loss. It was an erasure, and the 3 men who walked into that tree line are the only proof it ever occurred. 3 Navy SEALs entered the Ozark tree line at 0200 hours on a Tuesday in November. By 0317, 2 of them were unaccounted for. The third filed a report that was classified within 40 minutes of his extraction. What he described in that report doesn't match any known biology, any known behavior. And the section labeled visual confirmation was blacked out entirely, even from the men who wrote the classification order. This is what remains. The Missouri hills don't look like a threat, and Terrence Jackson said exactly that when debriefed. Laughing in a specific way people laugh when they're trying to make something survivable, in retrospect. The Ozark Plateau in November is all bare canopy and exposed limestone, and the kind of cold that doesn't bite so much as settle, pressing down through your gear and into your joints like it's making itself at home. It is not the landscape of a threat. That's the point. That's always the point. The briefing had been clean, sterile, even. 3-man recon team deployed to rural Missouri. No civilian presence within 11 kilometers. Objective: verify the origin of a low-frequency signal that had been looping on a restricted military band for 9 consecutive days. Not a distress code, not an enemy frequency, something that didn't correspond to any transmitter in the National Registry. Command had labeled it an anomaly in the same tone you'd use to describe a misfiled form: routine, procedural. They sent a CAL team to verify a misfiled form. Lieutenant Bernard Hilton, Calcine Whoopi, led the insertion. Wilfried had the signal triangulated to within 30 meters of a ridge, approximately 800 meters northeast of the insertion point. Terrence ran point. They moved in a staggered column from the vehicle at 0212. Thermal optics active, full noise discipline, no visible light. The kind of movement 3 men at their level could execute in their sleep. Practiced, automatic, language reduced to hand signals and short clicks on comms. Clean, quiet. The tree line swallowed them without resistance. 12 minutes of clean movement before Terrence stopped. He held up a closed fist, and the column froze. Whoopi watched him from center. Terrence hadn't moved his weapon, hadn't changed his posture, but he was holding completely still in the particular way that means the body has registered something the conscious mind is still trying to name. Whoopi counted 11 seconds before Terrence said over comms, very quietly, "Something just stepped behind me." Whoopi swept a full 360-degree thermal scan. Nothing on either flank, nothing above, nothing in the middle distance. Clean in every direction. He told Terrence to confirm and move. Terrence said copy and stepped forward, but his pace had changed. Shortened and elevated, the involuntary adjustment of a man whose nervous system has made a threat assessment his training is refusing to authorize. Whatever Terrence had felt out there, he still felt it. They reached the ridge at 0231. The source of the transmission was a hollow in the rock face, a natural cavity approximately 2 meters wide, sealed partially by collapsed stone and root overgrowth that suggested it had been undisturbed for years, possibly decades. Wilfried confirmed the signal origin without ambiguity. It was coming from inside the cavity, not a planted device, not a remote beacon. The frequency was being generated by something inside that hollow, with no visible external power source, no antenna structure, no mechanical housing of any kind. The signal was organic. Wilfried said it the way he said everything, flat, clinical, without interpretation, and somehow that made it worse. Whoopi ordered a hold at 15 meters, and called for visual confirmation before any approach. Terrence used a mirror scope to check the interior of the hollow, the kind of tool you use when you need to see around a corner without putting your head around it. He looked for 4 seconds, then lowered the scope without speaking. Whoopi asked for a report. Terrence said, "There's something in there. It's not a device." His voice was controlled. That control was doing a great deal of work. He passed the scope to Whoopi without further comment. What Whoopi saw was a large, hunched werewolf pressed flat against the back wall of the cavity. It was not moving. Its dark, matted fur was wet and glistening in the low-light optic, thick winter coat matted with frost. A powerful ridge of rigid bony spines ran along its back, each protrusion sharp and equidistant. Its lupin head was lowered, muzzle resting on forepaws, eyes closed or dimly glowing. Broad scarred, lupin skull forward, fangs partially bared in resting snarl. Massive dorsal ridge of black bony spines, vibrating rapidly. The source of the 9-day broadcast. Alive, intelligent, waiting. Whoopi pulled back from the scope and looked at Wilfried. Wilfried was already staring at his equipment with an expression Whoopi had never seen on him before. Not fear, not confusion, but the specific focused stillness of a man watching something rewrite what he thought he understood. Wilfried said, "It changed frequency the moment you looked at it. Not a lag, not a coincidence." The instant Whoopi's optic made contact with the creature, it modulated. It had detected the observation. It had responded to being seen. That was 0238 hours, the last confirmed moment all three men occupied the same location. Whoopi called it in immediately, a tight 60-second summary. Site confirmed. Biological origin confirmed. No precedent in any known classification. Recommendation for immediate specialized assessment and extraction authorization. Command told him to hold position and await further instruction. Hold position. 11 kilometers from the nearest civilian structure, in a tree line that had been silent since their insertion. 40 meters from something that had spent 9 days transmitting a signal no human being had designed, and Command said hold position. Terrence said something on comms that was redacted from every surviving version of the transcript. Whoopi told him to close it. Wilfried wasn't listening. He was watching his equipment with the fixed attention he reserved for anomalies he couldn't yet quantify. He told Whoopi, very quietly, that the secondary signal, the irregular shorter frequency he'd detected at the tree line 90 minutes earlier, was active again. But it was no longer emanating from the hollow. It was moving. Lateral, approximately 200 meters north, and closing. Not fast, deliberate. Wilfried gave the distance in a flat, steady cadence that somehow made the information more frightening than alarm would have. 200 meters, 160, Whoopi ordered a perimeter pull. All three men back to back, each covering a third of the compass. Terrence on north, Whoopi on west, Wilfried on south. Thermal optics active on all three. They held that formation for 4 full minutes, and nothing appeared. Not on thermal, not on visual, not on audio. The hills stayed silent. The trees didn't move, and Wilfried's distance count continued. 90 meters, 70, 60. Then he stopped giving updates entirely. Whoopi called for a status check. Nothing. He called again. Nothing. He turned and found Wilfried exactly where he should have been, facing south. Equipment in hand, eyes open, breathing steadily, and completely unreachable. Not unconscious, not injured. Present in every measurable physical sense, and absent in every meaningful one. Whoopi gripped his shoulder hard, and called his name directly into his ear. No response, not even a blink. What Wilfried would later describe in a partially classified session with a military psychologist, was the white gap. Full sensory awareness. No motor access, no speech, no reliable perception of elapsed time. The last distance reading he remembered giving was 60 meters. When the gap ended, his equipment showed no signal, no source. As if it had passed directly through their position, or as if it had stopped moving because it had arrived. Terrence was no longer facing north. He was moving toward the tree line, rifle lowered. Moving with the focused urgency of a man following something he was certain was real. Whoopi called him on comms, no response, then called his name aloud, at full voice, abandoning noise discipline without hesitation. Terrence stopped. He said, "It's Hilton. I can hear Hilton." Whoopi was standing 8 feet behind him. He said so. Terrence turned slowly, and the expression on his face moved through recognition and then through something underneath. Recognition, the look of a man understanding something he was not supposed to understand. He said, very carefully, "How long have you been standing there?" Whoopi said, "Since the pull, the whole time." Terrence looked back at the tree line for 3 long seconds. Whatever had been using Whoopi's voice to call him into the dark had stopped. Command came back at 0301 with extraction authorization. 22 minutes to the vehicle. Standard route. Whoopi called it to the team and initiated movement south. Terrence fell in behind him without speaking, moving well but tight. The way trained men move when their instincts are screaming and their discipline is the only thing overriding it. Wilfried brought up the rear, quiet and present in the specific way he got after a white gap, hyper-calibrated, taking in everything, saying nothing. 600 meters of clean movement. The tree line stayed silent around them, and then the hollow weight came up through the ground. It did not emerge from the trees or the brush. It came from below, breaking through a thin membrane of leaf cover and compressed soil, as if the earth had been a surface rather than a mass, and it landed 12 meters ahead of Whoopi, with no impact sound at all. One moment the path was empty, the next it was there. No transition, no approach, no warning. Whoopi stopped moving and brought his weapon up in a single motion, and for a full 3 seconds he simply looked at it, not because he froze, but because what he was seeing required a moment of raw recalibration before his training could fully engage. What stood in the path was tall and structurally wrong in a way that resisted clean description. Wrong the way a reflection is wrong when the mirror angle is slightly off, not monstrous, not aberrant, but incorrect in its proportions. Its geometry, the relationship between its components. It held its diagonal posture without movement. Spine structures elevated and vibrating in a register Whoopi could feel in his back teeth rather than hear. Its thermal signature in his optic was nearly nothing, a faint smear of heat rather than a body, as if it existed at the temperature of its environment rather than its own. It had no discernible face. What it had was the direction of its attention, which was aimed at Whoopi with a precision that had nothing to do with eyes. Whoopi engaged. 3 controlled shots, center mass, tight grouping. The hollow weight did not fall. It tilted the way a very tall structure tilts in wind, slowly, with all its mass, and then straightened back to vertical. It turned its blank forward structure toward him, and it screamed, not a roar, not a vocalization in any animal register. A scream that Terrence later described as 2 people screaming the same word at slightly different speeds, the syllables overlapping into something new, something that carried no language, but communicated with total clarity. It communicated, "I already know you. I have known you since before you arrived." Terrence opened from the flank, 7-round burst, full auto, tight grouping across the creature's midsection. The hollow weight moved toward the fire rather than away from it, closing the distance to Terrence in a transition no one present could track. One moment, it was 8 meters out. The next, Terrence's rifle was no longer an option and his sidearm was in his hand, and he was moving backward. What happened in the following 40 seconds is the most heavily redacted section of the surviving report. What can be confirmed? Terrence Jackson sustained injuries that matched no known predator bite pattern, no documented claw morphology, and nothing in the full military injury classification database. He was conscious and mobile during extraction. He did not speak for 11 days following. Whoopi moved east, drawing the hollow weight away from Terrence's position, firing selectively to maintain its attention, using the terrain and the gradient of the ridge to break line of sight, measuring its pursuit the way you measure any threat: distance, speed, angle of approach, rate of closure. What he measured over the next 3 minutes did not conform to any pursuit pattern he had trained to counter. It was not chasing him. It was following him. The distinction was critical. A pursuit implies intent to close and end. What the hollow weight was doing was closer to accompaniment, maintaining distance, matching pace, studying. That understanding, Whoopi later said, was the most frightening thing across 15 years of service. Not the gunfire, not the injuries, not the voice in the trees. The understanding that the creature was not trying to end the engagement. It was trying to extend it. Wilfried reached the vehicle at 0318. He has no memory of the final 400 meters, not the road, not the tree line, not unlocking the vehicle or starting the engine. He became present again, sitting in the driver's seat, with both hands on the wheel and the engine running. His signal equipment had logged every second: GPS coordinates, timestamps, frequency readings, continuous and precise. But there is no subjective experience behind those logs. The record exists without a witness. What the logs showed was that the secondary signal followed them from the ridge to within 80 meters of the vehicle, and then stopped. It did not cross into open ground. It held position at the tree line for 11 full minutes, long enough that Whoopi had already arrived and begun driving before the log finally went silent. Whoopi arrived at 0323. 4-centimeter laceration on his left forearm, clean-edged, not ragged, not consistent with claws or teeth. Something precise, something that implied a tool rather than a natural weapon, though no tool was ever recovered. He was carrying Terrence over one shoulder. He loaded him into the back seat and drove without speaking for the first 6 kilometers. Then he said, "It let me go." He meant it technically, close enough at 0309 that the engagement should have ended, and it didn't. The hollow weight stopped its approach, held position, and watched him walk away. He drove another kilometer before he spoke again. He said, "I don't know if that's better or worse." Neither did Wilfried. Neither does anyone who has since read the file. The specialized assessment team dispatched to the rock hollow at 0600 found the cavity empty. No biological material, no residue, no thermal trace, no physical evidence that anything had occupied the space. Nothing, except for one detail that survived the classification scrub because it appeared in the medical examiner's supplemental environmental report rather than the primary file, and was not flagged for removal in time. The interior walls of the hollow, floor, ceiling, all surfaces were covered in clean, precise, equidistant marks. The same type of mark as the laceration on Whoopi's forearm, scaled down and repeated thousands of times across every inch of available surface. Something had been in that cavity for a very long time, not trapped, not contained, waiting with enough patience to mark every surface of its shelter with the same precise gesture it would later leave on the arm of the man who came to find it. The looping signal on the restricted military band stopped at exactly 238. The moment Whoopi looked at the creature through the miroscope, the moment it changed frequency, those two events were simultaneous. The signal had been broadcasting for 9 days, and it stopped in the instant it detected an observer. That simultaneity was noted in 3 separate sections of the technical analysis and never explained in any of them. Wilfried's secondary signal, the frequency that moved, that followed them from the ridge to within 80 meters of the vehicle, has never been matched to any documented source. When his equipment logs were submitted for spectral analysis, the laboratory reported something that the lead analyst underlined twice in her summary. The frequency was not random, not ambient, not interference. It was a modulated response to the team's own radio transmissions. Structured, consistent, built from the vocabulary of their own comms. Something had been listening to them since before their insertion, and it had learned their signal language well enough to reply. Terrence Jackson received a medical separation 8 months after the operation. The official documentation lists a non-combat stress injury. He lives now in a small town in northern Tennessee, keeps a low profile, and has not given interviews of any kind. His neighbors describe him as friendly and watchful, the kind of man who checks whether you locked your car before he goes inside. He checks twice. He has been checking twice since November. Wilfried is still active. When asked directly about the white gap, about the time he lost on the ridge, the seconds or minutes that his equipment logged in his memory did not, he gives the same answer without variation. He says, "I don't think I was the only one experiencing it." He means the creature. He believes the gap was bilateral. He believes that in those missing seconds, the hollow weight was not in pursuit mode, not in an attack pattern. It was in a state of reception. He believes it was remembering. He does not elaborate on what he thinks it was remembering, or why that distinction matters to him, but it clearly does. Whoopi requested a full psychological evaluation 6 weeks after the operation, unusual for an operator of his experience and seniority. The kind of request that gets noticed and documented. In the intake form, under the section marked precipitating concern, he wrote 4 words, not a paragraph, not a summary. 4 words. They survived every classification review because no one flagged them as sensitive enough to remove, or because someone who read them decided they were exactly the kind of thing that should remain in the record. He wrote, "I recognized its voice. The hollow in the rock face has been sealed with poured concrete. The surrounding area now appears on a restricted land use map under a federal designation that doesn't correspond to any publicly listed program. The signal band is still monitored around the clock. It has been silent since November." The assessment team that sealed the site filed a supplemental recommendation that was also classified, also survived in partial form. It reads, "Do not return. Do not attempt contact. Do not attempt to replicate the frequency." And then in the margin, handwritten in ink by someone who had read every page and felt that the official language was not carrying enough weight, "It already knows the way back." 3 men went into the Missouri hills to find a signal. They found something that had already found them, something that had been waiting with enough patience to mark every surface of its shelter, something that could copy a voice well enough to make a trained operator walk toward the dark. One of them doesn't remember getting out. One of them checks the locks twice, and one of them recognized its voice, and still doesn't know what that means about him, or about what was out there in the trees, or about how long it had been listening before the mission ever began. The hollow is sealed. The frequency is silent. But the signal didn't stop because it ran out of something to say. It stopped because it got what it came for. Somewhere in a classified annex of a report that officially doesn't exist, there is a note about 3 other anomalous signals flagged on the same restricted band in the 18 months since this operation was closed. Different locations, different frequencies, same irregular secondary pattern. The investigation is ongoing. The investigators haven't been told what they're looking for. They've only been told to observe, report, and under no circumstances attempt to transmit back. Subscribe to The World Behind Midnight to uncover the next operation before it disappears. Some secrets are best left behind midnight.